And then our next item will be decision to conduct a virtual meeting.
So that's,
As-
I'm sorry, Matt, that's just a voice vote that you intend to conduct this evening's meeting virtually.
Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Moved by Colleen. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Suzanne. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Trustee Burns,
Aye.
Trustee Chakraborty,
Aye.
Trustee Fairfax,
Aye.
Trustee Fruth, aye. Thank you. And the motion passes. Approval of our minutes from our previous meeting. The first is the July 27th. Yeah, our regular meeting of July 27th. Are there any corrections or questions regarding that? Oh, we lost Colleen.
Colleen drop off.
It looks like.
Okay, then you better wait for her to rejoin.
Yeah.
Oh, there she is.
Okay. So are there any questions or corrections for the minutes from our July 27th meeting? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Yeah.
Suzanne moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Matarima. Any further discussion regarding the 27th minutes? Hearing none. Trustee Fairfax. Yay or nay?
Aye. Yay. Aye. What?
Matarima,
Yay.
Colleen,
Yay too.
and Matt is a yay. So those are approved. Thank you. And then our special meeting of the 24th of July. Any questions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Colleen. Any further discussion? Hearing none. And call the voting. Matarima.
Aye. Yeah. Aye.
Yes. Suzanne.
Aye.
Colleen.
Aye.
Matt is a yay. Those minutes are approved. Thank you. We will move on to public comments. I did not receive anything in writing specific to public comments for this meeting. David, did you?
I did not.
Do any of our guests wish to make a public statement at this time? Okay. No one is entering anything in the chat or that they want to speak. So we will move on to trustee comments and calendar. Anything of note, David, that you want to bring attention to?
Just a couple of things, maybe just a reminder of the iGov Assembly coming up on Saturday, the 18th. I think all of you should have received your invitations to that. The elected officials barbecue hosted by the Park District of Oak Park at the Pleasant Home on October 13th. Again, I think all of you should have received your invitations to that. And no, I think that's all.
Any trustee comments? All right.
Wait, no, sorry, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
About did I get the IGov assembly? I mean, I definitely remember getting the
I
October
will,
thing.
I will check to make sure that I sent all of you the calendar invitation to that. I thought that I had.
I thought I had received that as well.
Let's see here.
And I'll cover content during my iGov report for those that are interested in.
Thanks, Colleen. Yes, I sent a calendar invitation for this Saturday to all of you on the Board of Trustees. I sent it to both of your email addresses.
Sure.
I will I'll follow up with an email, make sure that you with a reminder, just to make sure that you see that.
Okay,
I just
thank you.
double checked and you were in the calendar, Madhurima.
Okay, thank you.
There's just lots of emails that come through from the library, which is lovely, but sometimes it's hard to not miss some of them.
I appreciate that.
And I believe it's 9 a.m. to 11, right?
I believe that's right. Colleen, is that correct?
That's what's on the calendar.
That's correct. They adjusted the time a half an hour shorter because it will be a virtual format instead of in person.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I do see it. I think I won't say that I mistyped iGov for my search, but for whatever reason, I could not find it, but I do see it. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. All right. Any other trustee comments?
Matt, I've
Hearing-
joined, but I'm not able to join via video because I'm driving.
Well, I appreciate your focus on safety. Thank you for making an effort to be with us.
Sorry, I'm
Even-
late.
That's quite all right. These things happen. So we have just concluded our trustee comments and board calendar. We will move on to staff reports.
Do we need to enter something that Sarah Glavin is now in the meeting?
As this is being recorded, and we'll make sure that it's Rita notes it in the minutes.
Already done. I moved her up to present at 6:44.
Awesome, Rita. You're the best.
Thanks, Rita.
Does anyone have any questions for David as part of his report?
Will there be an opportunity to bring something up as we go?
If it's something to do with the reports, you're more than welcome to bring them up right now.
No, I just wanted to know if as we go along, if there's other opportunities.
Regarding,
Just, is this the one time only, or do we, yeah, never mind.
oh, if you mean like later in the meeting, you have a question about something in the report?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we can go back to revisit something if,
Great, thanks.
any other
So you have,
questions?
I'm sorry, you have my narrative report. You have of course, the library strategic priorities report, focusing on various objectives and strategies. And then, of course, the core use statistics report. So I'm happy to answer any questions about my narrative specifically. Other staff from the leadership team and the management team are also with us, and would, I'm sure, be happy to help me answer questions about the strategic priorities report or the core use statistics if you have questions about those.
I guess I was wondering how it's going with the teen space. Like, you know, in the report, it said that the teen space, you know, we were waiting to see once school restarts how that was going. And I'm really just curious about like the usage of that space.
The opening looked amazing.
Yep, I know they had a fantastic grand opening just last week, and the teen board, the members of the teen board were there with Stephen Jackson and the members of his team to welcome everyone and talk about the development of the space. So I think quite well, actually, but I think that Lori Pulliam is on with us, and perhaps she might want to say a few words about it.
The only thing that, hi everyone, this is Lori. The only thing that I've heard from Stephen is that they're still not seeing as many kids as we saw pre-pandemic. So they're working on more outreach, but there was a good turnout for the opening, and they expect to get more kids to experience the space, but still working on it, but so far so good.
Thanks, Lori.
Well, school also just started, you know, so I think they're probably immersed in that at the moment. It doesn't surprise me.
Any other questions anyone has about any of the reports?
Okay. You know what, there was one thing, and I'm trying, you know what, I was looking at it the other day, and I did have a question about something in the statistics, but now that I'm looking over the tables and the charts again, I cannot for the life of me remember what it was.
Okay.
So clearly it was very, very important.
Well, if you think of it, let me know.
I will.
I felt like I had, I mean, it's more of a comment than a question, but I thought that it was really interesting that even as we're seeing the uptick in in-person usage, that there's not a corresponding decrease in the digital usage, you know, like there's just a little bit, but so I think isn't that, to me, seems like a good sign. Like in general, it seems that just more people are using the library then, right? Like or the library services and materials.
Well, I think we're going to see the usage of digital and virtual services continue to stay higher than perhaps we saw in the past for quite a while. I mean, even though you're right, people are beginning to return physically to our spaces, that's for very limited things and for very limited amounts of time. People are still not spending a great amount of time in our spaces, and I think are continuing to use digital and virtual services, and that's, again, partly also, I think importantly so, because we have yet to resume the use of our public meeting spaces.
When is that scheduled, or is that in here somewhere?
We've just begun taking reservations again for the use of those spaces, and so we expect that people will be returning to them shortly. The library staff will continue to wait to host our own programs in our indoor spaces until mask mandates are lifted. But we are permitting members of the community to make reservations for the use of spaces for their own meetings and their own events, as long as they understand that they are to comply with the state mandate to wear masks indoors.
So no library sponsored events, but other groups.
Not indoors for the time being, correct?
Okay, gotcha, thank you. I've heard some medical people saying that they're hoping that this surge will actually end, like that we may end it because so many new people are getting vaccinated. So let's hope for that.
Let's hope for sure.
Right, because then, then people will be feeling more comfortable indoors, I think.
If there were not a indoor mask mandate right now, I think we would begin hosting indoor programs. The library staff would begin hosting them, but until that's lifted, we won't. And until more children are eligible for and are beginning to be vaccinated, we will continue to restrict indoor programs for children as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate how you're handling all of this roller coaster of medical data and, new variants, and, the picture keeps changing, and I feel like you're adapting nicely.
Thank you.
David, is the mask mandate with the staff thing, is that just it seems like I in my mind, that makes sense to be, we don't want our staff to have to be policing that at events.
Right. Yes. So exactly. So
yeah,
if
that makes perfect sense. I mean, I just want to make sure that you and I was having the same.
That's exactly right. I mean, in public spaces, certainly staff, if people come up to them and want assistance, will be asked to wear a mask if they're not. I think that's happening, thankfully, rather infrequently. I think most people are continuing to regularly wear their masks in the public spaces. But if patrons reserve a space such as the Veterans Room, for instance, and they're inside that space having their event, it will be, unless a staff member is asked to come in to help with a problem or answer a question, it will be up to those individual patrons to monitor that themselves.
Got it. I think I remember what my question was on the statistics.
Yeah.
The big jumps for new users in June and July, is that related to our partnership with D97 for student registration, or are we just getting a lot of new users for that?
That is a very good question. And I will have to get the answer to that. I'm not positive if that's the case or not, Matt. I'm sorry.
I mean, we see a jump in May, and we see the continued uptick. I'm just wondering if it's a matter of, as Matt Hariyama says in the chat, like, is it spaces being reopened? But I do know that we also have, the D97 student registration has an option for students to be signed up for library cards.
I think it's true typically that when school resumes, we see an increase in those registrations because students are getting their cards and teachers are renewing or getting cards. I don't know that that answers the whole question, but I think that's a part of it.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, I'm glad we're getting new users, but it's just one of those, is it something that we're doing that we can keep doing, or is it one of those outside factors that we just happen to kind of luck into?
Yeah.
So
if another member of the team has an idea about that when I talk to them tomorrow, I'll follow up.
Okay, thank you. All right then. If there's no other questions about the staff reports, we will move on to the financial reports. Excuse me.
We have Jeremy's, our Director of Operations narrative report here first in the packet, followed by all of the disbursements and other financial reports, and then finally the report of funds from the Community Foundation. And I know Jeremy is on the line. if there are questions that I can't answer for you, I know he will be happy to do so.
Yeah, there was nothing that jumped out at me, but anyone else? Okay. Then we have our disbursements report. Is there any questions about any of those transactions in that ledger? Which starts on page 21.
Thank you. Helpful.
Runs through page 48. If there are, Suzanne, are you looking through it, or did you have a specific question or anything about that?
I have a specific question. No, I'm
Okay, you were looking down, so I just wanted to know if you were like trying to
I-
find something to ask.
no, I'm looking through it, but I don't have a specific thing. I apologize.
No worries. Because I was scrolling through it myself on my other screen, and I didn't want to miss anyone's perhaps
Other
unspoken
screen.
gesture.
That's a good idea, other screen, because this was a lot to print, the poor trees. Another screen, that's what I should do next time.
Yeah, I usually have my iPad, but I couldn't find it before the meeting. Is there a motion to approve the disbursements report?
So moved.
Moved by Madhurima. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Colleen. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Trustee Glavin.
Yes,
Yay or-
sorry, I was
yes.
muted. Yay.
Okay. Trustee Fairfax,
I,
Trustee Burns,
Aye.
Trustee Chakraborty,
Aye.
Trustee Fruth, aye. Those are approved. And then we have our income and expense report and our balances from the community foundation. Are there any questions or comments regarding that? Everything seems to be on pace of what we seem to be from past years, if I'm looking at this correctly, just because it's like one of those things where I'm trying to remember what items tend to be a little bit more front loaded in the year, and what we don't really have, well, we don't spend too much at the back end of the year as I'm looking through some of this. So are there any lines, David or Jeremy, that we need to be aware of that might go over as we get to the end of the year?
Jeremy might have a couple of comments about that. I don't know if he does. He can chime in if he does. The only thing I would say is that at this point, and we can talk more about this at the regular September meeting at the end of the month, but I do expect that we will overspend for legal fees before the end of the year. And right now we're at just under 83% expended for the year. And I do expect that to be that for us to go over budget in that line. And that is, I think, will have a lot to do with the fact that our attorneys are spending a lot of time dealing with issues related to the unionization of the facilities team and the beginning of contract negotiations with that particular union.
Good to know.
Jeremy, did you want to say anything else?
Just the only other thing I think the only other line item that I think will be over is the landscaping. And that was from early in the year, snow removal. Everything else I think is on track to be on target, or yeah, it should be on target. I don't think there's going to be a lot underspent either. But you know, as I went through it, I think everything is pretty solid. And the landscaping is a small portion of the total. So, but we'll make an adjustment into that the next year as well.
Okay.
So there's not been any reduction because of being closed or COVID.
Reduction in what sense?
In
Suzanne?
expenses and costs.
Uh,
Like everything is pretty much on target for the way it usually is. So nothing.
Correct. That's correct. Yes.
So we didn't have any savings based on not being open as much.
No, I mean, no, because we had, you know, made the decision intentionally to continue to maintain the same staffing levels that we had
Right.
Prior to the pandemic.
I just didn't know if, you know, because there may have been some staff who've left or that sort of thing, if there was any savings. And the only reason I'm asking that, and that's why I was trying to figure out when is the, you know, kind of the right point, is that you know, tax bills went out and people are really feeling the hurt and the combination of the pandemic and the tax bills. Now, not everybody in town is, you know, there's some people it's,
Sure.
you know, it's not a hurt, but just that whole kind of awareness of using the equity lens everywhere, including thinking about increases in taxes during, you know, or following in the pandemic.
Right. Well, the main topic of business tonight under new business is to begin talking about our budget for next fiscal year. So I think that would definitely be the time tonight to begin introducing that as a part of the conversation for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Moving on to additional reports, iGov.
Thanks, Matt. So the iGov folks have been talking about our sustainability forum, which is this Saturday. And just if it's helpful, I'll provide a little bit of context, if I may, if you'll indulge me. This was all born out of, there was an ad hoc group of folks from the village who are meeting around our sustainability goals in the village and what we might want those to be. And they started in like summer of last year and essentially finalized some recommendations to present to the village board in, I want to say, March. And they presented it to the village board and they were endorsed, and the village staff has presented a plan for implementation. And a couple of the things that I'll just highlight is, you know, addressing our greenhouse gas emissions and, you know, using an equity lens in terms of how we're reducing barriers to access for residents, and then prioritizing our low to middle income residents when we're talking about programs that might be available to folks in the village. And so what they're doing essentially is, like, the first recommendation is to do a PR campaign around energy efficiency audits. So, you know, pushing out information around, you know, awareness that the programs exist and that, you know, educating residents about them and commercial building owners as well. And then number 2 is creating a residential retrofit grant fund. So targeting low-income homeowners in the village and rentals to be able to access some of those funds to do like retrofitting of your home, you know, whatever you might, energy efficiencies. And then recommendation number 3 is creating a reduce energy slash like encouraging solar in the village. So incentivizing, people to install rooftop solar. Number 4 is kind of exciting, hiring a full-time sustainability staff member at the village. I actually think they've already put out the job description and have been interviewing candidates, which is really cool. So anyways, that is the reason for this summit, so to speak, where representatives from the village are going to be available to talk about some of these recommendations. So essentially, in terms of objectives, informing elected officials and all of the residents in the village about, these climate action activities that are happening, not just at the village board, but also within and among the other taxing bodies. And then they're using it as kind of like a kickoff event, so to speak. And then informing everybody in the village about what they can do to lower carbon emissions, in their own homes. So there'll be Don Harmon's going to kick things off, I think. And then Susan Buchanan, who's been kind of leading this effort at the village, is going to be there to talk a little bit. They've got somebody else who is going to be talking like in depth about carbon emissions for a few minutes. Has apparently gone through Al Gore's program, which sounds like fun. And then there's going to be a panel of some elected, some other taxing bodies. So they've decided, instead of opening it up to all of the taxing bodies, they're just going to have a few key representatives from the village and from the park district, both of whom are doing a lot on climate action. And then they're going to do like breakout rooms, essentially, where they're going to have folks from ComEd and other experts presenting to village residents about all those things that I just mentioned at the top. So like those, energy audits and, what you can do to participate in the village compost program and stuff like that. And then like what you can do to advocate for change in our village. And I'm hoping it's going to be really well attended. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
That sounds great, Colleen. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize that was all going on.
Yeah, they're really excited about it. Again, this is kind of Susan's baby, but they were really hoping to be in person. And since that's not a thing, these breakout rooms with they're calling it speed dating, where you're gonna be able to go from one room to another for about 5 minutes. For a presentation, and then take a few questions, and you can bounce around. So if you're really interested in composting, you can go do that. If you're really interested in renewables and that solar program, and just having an opportunity for everybody to learn more about the programming that's going to be made available. I failed to mention, but I should, is the sustainability fund that was created at the village is born from that plastic bag tax that was implemented, I don't know, a couple of years ago at least now. And then also, in addition to that plastic bag tax, is there's a residential electric fee. And all of that money is going into this sustainability fund. So when I mentioned those grants that would be given out to low-income homeowners who are interested in retrofitting their house, making their homes more efficient, that's where that money is going to come from. That's the long and short of it.
That's this is really helpful. When you're talking about incentivizing solar energy, do you know what the incentives are, and what, like, are there grants, or are there?
Yeah, I think what it is if you're interested in solar, that the village will help with $1,000 rebate if you can show that you have a 15% reduction in your energy use over 1 year. Apparently, one of the issues is that our old homes in Oak Park need some energy efficiency, like retrofitting, in order for solar to make sense. So that's why that 15% reduction in energy use over 1 year is built into it, because it doesn't make sense to have solar if your home's just like leaking, air conditioning or heat, as the case may be.
Great. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Did it come up that the, about some of the, any recommendations? Because I know the villages had, I believe the villages had sustainability staff members before. I'm just wondering, did anyone raise up anything that they had found or recommended?
Not to my knowledge, Matt, but I'm new enough to the village that I didn't know about that.
Sure. Well, I don't think even when we had it, not many people did, but I think David may remember when they came over, because we were getting complaints at the library about the lights at night. And I'm trying to remember her name, but she came over and did a tour after hours to look at our lighting scheme of like how the lights get turned off at night and get cycled for the cleaning crews, and was very impressed with it, and actually told everyone that we were actually doing a really good job, even though because we had like high gloss wood ceilings that the light reflected very well, and it looked like more lights were on than they actually were. And I'm trying to remember her name for the life of me, but anyway, but I know that they've had people in the past, but it's like they've been here for a couple of years and then they leave and then they don't hire a replacement right away. So just.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that Susan mentioned that, hiring a full-time staff person, a permanent full-time staff person was certainly one of her biggest priorities, because they want somebody to create and then implement a climate action plan for the village.
Okay.
So I fully anticipate that there are going to be questions about this, for my fellow trustees and for David and staff, about what the library is doing around sustainability. I was disappointed when they mentioned that they weren't going to invite the library to present at the symposium on Saturday, because in their words, they felt that the village and the park district were doing the most on sustainability, which I don't think is entirely fair, but I do expect that, especially once there is a full-time person at the village who's thinking about these issues, that there'll be opportunities for us to start to discuss how the library fits into that puzzle.
Sounds good.
Yep. I hope everybody can join.
COG meets tomorrow morning, bright and early, via Zoom at 8 a.m. So David, I will see you there.
Absolutely.
ILA legislative and advocacy. I sent everyone the advocacy toolkit document that the committee members had been working on and final and put together. We will be. So that was what we talked a lot about in the meeting at the beginning of the month was that, and so we'll and some other initiatives, and I need to follow up with one of my fellow committee members about some legislative outreach for upcoming events. But otherwise, I think no legislative activity that I'm aware of related to veto session at the end of October. So.
I had a quick question, Matt.
Yes.
In a recent conversation I was having with someone at the Chicago Public Library Foundation, there was some conversation about ILA potentially taking a position on racial equity related to like staff positions across regional libraries in the state. And just was curious, have you heard any kind of ILA strategy or kind of formal plan around improving access for diverse hiring or prioritizing funding or access for community-based libraries related to focusing on equity? It came up as though they had taken a stance, and I haven't had a chance to review the documents you shared, but was curious if that's something you've heard about or could share more about.
Not in the advocacy committee. That may be something that's coming up in public policy, which is a separate committee than the than the advocacy.
Got it.
So,
Okay, no worries. If you hear anything in that, Brent, I was just curious if it meant, potential funding availability or specialized training or
I'll-
anything that they were
I'll
going to
keep an
create that
ear
might be a
out.
benefit to the library.
Sure. And it's weird because we just changed they changed the schedule this year for when we meet, because usually on the once a month that we have our meetings for the public policy and advocacy meet usually on the same day. And in the prior to this year, prior to the last month, public policy met first and then advocacy met, so we could have those discussions about advocacy of public policy discussions. But this year they flipped it, so it's sometimes we can talk about what's on the agenda for public policy, but we can't really get into any of their decisions until like a month later. And so we may end up switching back, because I think there was a realization that it's not really helpful for the way we need to do some of the work, that that the advocacy comes before the policy. It's so we'll see how that scheduling continues to play out, but I'm hoping they switch it back, because it's hard to say, well, this is what they're gonna talk about, but we don't know what they're gonna decide or revise. So we'll see. But we meet on like the first Monday of the month, so we'll see what happens in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. And Friends of the Library, any reports there?
I know they actually they weren't able to proceed with their meeting because they didn't have enough participation. I think it was kind of a misscheduling issue. David, did you have any other updates from them? I know you had some other traffic, but it seemed mostly administrative.
No, nothing of note.
Then we have our library employment report. Sorry, I had to let someone in. Was there any discussion about this report? Okay, we'll move on to new business, our draft of our 2020 budget.
All right. Included in your packet are a number of documents that I'll just briefly mention. They are the financial spreadsheets that Jeremy Andrzejowski, the Director of Operations, has prepared and will talk you through. There are some documents related to compensation analysis and market equity wage and salary increases that Billy Treese, our Director of Human Resources, has prepared, and he can talk about and answer questions about those. There were a few questions from the board at a previous meeting regarding planning for the selection and expenditure for digital materials. And Lee Tarullo, and our Director of Collections, and Barbara Fitzgerald, our Material Services Manager, are both on the call. They prepared a document, planning for digital materials. And if you have any questions about that during your discussion, they would be happy to talk through those or answer those questions. And then finally, I included for your reference a copy of the library's current fund balance policy that I think might be useful when you are talking about how the library has traditionally used its fund balance and the implications for a fund balance moving forward into next year and subsequent years, relative to the decisions that you'll make about any increases in the levy or the budget that you would want to request. So for my, before I turn it over to Jeremy first to introduce the spreadsheets that we have in the board packet, I would say, just remind you that this is the first of several conversations. Of course, this conversation was initially scheduled to take place at the end of August, but the first of several conversations that you will have to prepare a budget for next fiscal year 2022, that for us in the village begins on January 1st. We begin with a conversation of those elements that I think we need to cover in order to get to some consensus before we can present more detailed or specific budget proposals to you in subsequent meetings, namely what expectations the board has for revenue, what our expectations, the staff expectations are for revenue, what the board's expectations are and what its priorities are regarding expenditures for human resources, for salaries, for wages, for benefits. And again, the documents that Billy has prepared will be useful during that part of the discussion. And then a conversation about expenditures for physical capital. And again, that's I think where the fund balance policy and including that in the discussion will be useful. So for this first conversation tonight, and then the second one at the end of this month, and then finally in October, when we're expected to actually adopt a budget for next fiscal year, the priority really is tonight coming to consensus on, or at least a general consensus on expectations for both revenue and expenditures for human capital and human resources and potentially expenditures or expected expenditures for physical capital and infrastructure. If we can at least tonight understand what the board's priorities are for those things, then that will tell us at the end of this month and then again in October what more specific budget documents that we should show you. Because once we've really come to consensus on what we expect to do regarding revenue and what we expect to do regarding expenditures for staff, those, particularly staff, that being by far the most significant part of the budget regarding expenditures, the rest of the budget sort of falls in line after that. We really need to understand what the board's desires and priorities are for those things before we can really move forward. So just my introduction to what the conversation tonight is about, and certainly the conversation can go wherever the board members want it to go, and we'll answer whatever questions you have and provide as much information as we can to help you make the decisions that you need to make. So unless you have any opening questions for me, I'll have Jeremy start by talking about the financial spreadsheets that he's prepared.
All right, no questions? All right, so before we get into the spreadsheets, there's just a couple things I want to just give an overview of as far as the fund balance. You'll see the policy later in the packet. There's a couple targets on there that are relevant, at least to the budget. The target beginning fund balance at the end of the year, beginning of the year, is 40 to 48% of our budget, basically the revenue budget. The target goal is 42%, and that's what you'll see along the top line there. You'll see like the second, third row down, you'll see 42% along that line. That is 42% of our operating budget. So just give you an idea of kind of what those numbers mean. Percent of unappropriated funds down in the bottom. It's probably like the fifth row. It might be easier if I share my screen, but to point that out. So that's do
you want to share I can stop sharing this and you can share your screen if you want, Jeremy. Do you want to do that?
It might be a little easier to go through this because then I
Okay.
can point out things, highlight things.
let me first make sure that you can do that. Okay, and I'm going to stop this share, and you can share your screen.
See which one I have open here. All right, I think this is the right one. All right. So you can see me highlight here. This column, the row here, 73%, 71%, 60%. That's the amount of fund balance we're ending up with at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, right? So we're starting this. The amount up on the top is the actual number estimated. So beginning in 2022, my projections say we should be about 5.9 million at the beginning of the year. This number here, 4.157, is the target of 42% of that. So we're over by 1.7 million. Okay, that's over the target, which is 60%. So as you read through going forward, you can see that that number comes down. This number, our target reserve by the fund balance, should be 40 to 48% is the range that we should end up with at the end of the year. And that's to carry us over from the beginning of the year until we start getting our tax distributions typically in March and April. Plus any other issues that come up. Like right now in September, we have yet to see any revenue, and normally we're starting to see revenue come in. So we need to be able to carry over through those periods. So that's one of the targets I want you to keep in mind, is that 42% goal. The other part of it in the fund balance policy says capital plus building should be about 8 to 12%. So now in our budget, if we add the total capital group down at the bottom of the spreadsheets and our repair and maintenance line, then that both of those together, the repair and maintenance is part of our operating. And I can show you that as we go down. I don't want to scroll up and down and make you dizzy, but so the repair and maintenance is part of our operating budget. And then the capital budget, that is for additional capital projects like the IT projects that we have going on, the switches, Wi-Fi access points, and building. We just had some painting done at Maze that will come out of the repair and maintenance. But then we also have big projects like the access and security control. That's $290,000 approved for this year. That is in the capital budgets. So those two combined in this budget in 2022 are 8%, which is on target of what the fund balance policy says. The other things that I want to keep in mind, just for kind of a waterline, are the ILA standards for public libraries. And there are a couple lines there that they talk about wages and salaries should be about 60% of the total budget revenue. This budget that we're presenting here for 2022, the 5.68, I'll scroll down here. So this section here, 5.680 is 57% of the total revenue budget that we expect. All right, so that's on target with the ILA standards. The other part of it for ILA standards is approximately 70% of salaries and fringe benefits should be, or 70% of the budget should be salaries and fringe benefits, which if we add in, they note like IMRF, Medicare, FICA, all of these. If we add in all of our talent development as well, that this total 7.6 million is 77% of the 9.8. So that's our salaries are on target by ILA standards, and our fringe benefits are above average for the market. So those are a couple of things we want to keep in mind. The other part is materials for the public, and their target is 8 to 12%. And let me just scroll down to library materials here. This 1.107, that's 11% of our total projected revenue for 2022. So we're on target with all of these different standards in our fund balance policy in this fiscal year 2022 budget. So that's the good news. The bad news is if we scroll down to page 64 here, you'll see we are deficit spending in operating. Let me scroll a little further, and we're deficit spending more so. These are total. So this 993,804 is all of the capital expenditures and the operating expenditure deficit spending, which gives us the net change in fund balance going into 2023, negative 9.9 million. Or not, I'm sorry, 993,000. All right. So as you look forward, these numbers are deficit spending. And this is the total for capital and basically you'll see here the change in general fund balance. So in a perfect world, we have our revenue coming in, our expenditures, this would be zero, right? If we're planned right, we have everything going on target. Because we have, let me scroll back to the top. Because we have such a large fund balance, and this goes back a few years, the board over the past couple of years has approved deficit spending to get this down to our target. So we had a couple things happen. We were deficit spending for multiple years. And then we also had the TIF distribution roll out into this amount, which we normally received but did not budget for, rolls into our expected revenue tax levy. So this number includes the TIF money. Because we didn't budget for it, that money came on top of our expected budget. And so there was additional funds, which is why I think we increased our fund balance way beyond the target. Okay, so there's where we're at now, is looking at the 9.740 for, and that is an expected, that's basically requesting a 3% tax levy from the taxpayers. This number up on the top here, 3%, that I have calculated for property tax for operating going forward. So this number goes forward at 3%. You'll see as we go through all of these numbers here, this 2% is everything else, all the other revenue, like corporate property replacement, fees and charges, photocopier, printer, all of this is going up 2%. And then the people expenditures, that this year is 3.74, and then it's 2% increase on above that. That's what this is, general percent on increases, expenses. So it's trying to figure out what is the estimate of all our expenses going up. And in this spreadsheet, I have them kind of marked at 2%. And then the revenue basically looking at 3%. And the reason that's higher than the expenses is because of these deficits down the road. So we're deficit spending now. We need to basically balance that back out because as we get down here into budget 2027, 2026, if you'll notice in our distributions are about $800,000 a month that you're approving. So we got to get from the beginning of the year into March or April. So that's $800,000 for those 4 months. If we get payments late going into 2026, this could be an issue where we're having to borrow money to make operating costs. This one, we got maybe 3 months before we start looking at the 4th month borrowing for operating costs, because we're below our target. So there needs to be some balance between the increase in tax levy and the increase in the overall expenditures. Okay, does that make sense? So I know the board at the earlier meetings we're talking about in strategic planning, we're talking about maintaining market equity, which I think is critical for retention and getting the right people on board. So that's something that to consider. How do we do that while balancing this out? The other part of it, let me scroll down a little further, is looking at so our overall operating, page 65. Some of these numbers going forward are pretty speculative. So like this number here for I don't know if it's lined up properly on here, but sanitary storm and vent problems, this is in the capital asset study from 2016. So it's getting a bit dated. I'm asking for 65,000 in 2022. I think that's what it cost in 2016 to get the capital asset study. And so hopefully that will be come in under budget to get that engineering assessment redone and get these numbers a little more accurate on what we need going forward. So some of these numbers like this here, the sanitary storm and vent problems was 6.9 million or something like that. I'm sorry, 690,000, not 6.9, 690,000. So just for the budget, if we could break this out and do this in phases, it levels off the budget so we don't have these big hops and jumps in capital spending. So that's what the spreadsheet is. You'll see all of this, all of these items should be in the capital asset study. The one thing that we did remove, if you remember from last year, if you were here, is the full HVAC system was targeted to be replaced in 2033. And so that total, I think it came to like $340,000 a year over the next 10 years would get us close. Because I think it was about 5 million, something like that, to replace all of that. Now, again, that's very speculative and there's time to kind of sort that out, but something to keep an eye on the horizon. Then page 66 is our IT projects. And that's, you know, there's a grouped a little bit differently, but then you'll see some of these gaps here. So if we have other IT projects in the coming years, those will need to be filled in here as well and prioritized to what the trustees, what you all say are limits on the budget. So that's kind of an overview of all of this going forward. One of the things that I did, so let me stop sharing that screen and I want to share, let's see if I can get in here. I wanted to share one other thing looking forward that I've been working with is this long-term draft. This budget, let me see if I make sure I'm in the right window here. Okay, so this is the long-term draft. What I did, let me hide a couple of these. So Suzanne, you were talking about the different spending, and I think you can see that in your budget as well. We have the actuals from 2019 and the actuals from 2020. So you'll see some of the differences here. And let me scroll down to materials. So library materials here, you'll see this big drop off, you know, so it's what about $130,000 drop off in print materials, but that was applied to digital streaming. So then going forward, we're looking at it and saying, okay, where do we want to be going forward? We're going to maintain that level of digital content. We're going to go back and try and balance out a little bit more print, but you'll see some of those adjustments. So you can use that to take a look at some of those impacts that happened in 2020. Like as David said, there's not been a huge impact as far as that, other than some of those shifts like that. I think most of the ongoing costs, we needed to maintain those costs just to keep the buildings in good shape. And last year we did have quite a few capital projects done. The other thing I did in this spreadsheet was take a look at what would it need to balance these numbers out going forward. Let me scroll this over the next 10 years. And so you'll see our target number here, it's 37, 33. So this drops down, and that's because of the deficit spending. The deficit spending, let me scroll down to the bottom. The deficit spending ends in this spreadsheet. Now this is asking, this shows a 3.5% increase in the tax levy. The deficit spending in operating ends in 2023. Then we're starting to build back. The capital starts building back a little later because of some of the key projects that we have slated for through 2026. And then we start building back and balancing this back out. And that's why you see these numbers drop down below our target and start increasing over the next decade. Now this spreadsheet is kind of a worksheet for you just to keep an eye on things, how things can change. And so if we were to say, okay, we're going to hold flat our expenses, then it brings us closer on target earlier, but that's holding all of the expenses flat. If we were to hold wages and salaries flat, then we only have 1 year, but then we're going to be over budget going forward here. So we would balance this out with the tax revenues. So then we could look at 2% increase. So all of that just to say there's a lot of moving parts in here that you need to be aware of, and that let me stop sharing that. And I'll give that back to David to show the screen, or if you want me to share the budget that's presented there, I'm happy to do that as well. And I know that's a lot of information looking at it, but I think that gives you the information to take a look at it and say, where do we want to be going forward with an eye on the horizon? Certainly now going into 2022, that's all we are approving is for fiscal year 2022. But to have that big level, big picture eye on the horizon on the overall expenditures and the revenues that we expect going forward. And basically what the board, you are willing to ask for from the taxpayers to maintain the library. All right.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I know that's, yeah, hopefully that's not too heavy, but.
That was, yeah, no, thanks. Jeremy, yeah, he shared a lot of information there with you. So I just want to give you a moment to think about that. And before I ask Billy to talk about his study of compensation, just want to make sure you don't want to ask any questions of Jeremy at this point. I guess the only thing I would say additionally to what Jeremy just shared with you, again, just to be clear, when Jeremy talks about deficit spending, again, to be clear, what he is talking about is the intentional expenditure of funds from the library's fund balance, specifically to pay for capital expenditures, capital projects. And again, that is, at least in the years that I have been with the library, that is typically how the library has chosen to handle the expenditures for capital projects, is to handle those through the fund balance. But the kinds of revenue that we have also traditionally anticipated as revenue to replenish that fund balance, that also has significantly changed over the last several years, most notably regarding the end of all of the village's TIF districts and any expected revenue from the disbursements from those districts, which has, as you know, has now come to an end. So when Jeremy talks about deficit spending, I think what he's really talking about there is the intentional spending of the funds from the fund balance to pay for capital expenditures. So again, before I ask Billy to talk about compensation. Do you have any questions at this point that you want to ask Jeremy?
Jeremy, this is Sarah. I have a quick question for you. As you're showing us kind of the year over year budget estimates beyond 2023, is it fair to assume, and I'm trying not to, but as you're looking at the variances, I apologize, I can't see the columns on my document, but can you talk to us a little bit about the percentages year over year as you're going across kind of 23 to 27 regarding various line items? I think I'm trying to understand what you're talking through around, realigning the way we've been approaching bringing the fund balance down to what we had as a board agreed upon by comparison to what costs the staff feels need to be considered for ongoing adjustment, with a 1 to 3% increase year over year by comparison to some of the costs that might hold a little bit more steady. Because, clearly I think we've been prioritizing labor for wages and salaries, as we've talked about. The work Billy's going to talk more on, kind of bringing our pay equity more into alignment. But I think it's also helpful for us as we're thinking about where some of those other levers may be, and how to best inform us of some of the conversations you're having across the staff, where, capital expenditures, clearly what we don't want to do is be in a situation, or at least I'm speaking for myself, where we're asking the community to go to referendum by comparison to things you may be foreseeing around cost of digital services, as an example, that based on trending, you think we need to be anticipating a 2 to 3% increase year over year. Is there a way that you may be able to communicate some of those more, I guess I would say, fixed cost versus expectations around percentage increases year over year that we should begin to think about as we're looking at this comprehensively?
I could try. I think, through these discussions, some of the big cost drivers, I think, salary, of course, salary and wages drives most of the personnel, right? All of the people costs are kind of waterfall down from the salary and wages. So I think that's part of it. The insurance cost is probably one of the bigger ones. This year, actually, we're fortunate because that we had a large jump last year, and I estimated conservatively. So the increase this year that we're expecting for 2022 actually fits within what was budgeted for 2021. So we're not going to see a big jump in the insurance cost. Now, going forward, that could be, that could change. The conversations that I've had and what I've seen, because a lot of the staff are building this, materials, services, I haven't seen any issue with them saying, oh, we need more material, we need more books. We're within those target ranges, and I think they felt pretty comfortable with it. Programming, I think it's the same kind of thing where the focus is, and programming is a drop in the bucket as far as the overall budget, but there are some adjustments, and I know Lori's on the call too, that there are some different things we can do. But most of it is the people that are doing those programs, and that's really what's driving a lot of the costs. All of the other costs, I think, there are some things that we can't really predict. So just looking at kind of the general cost drivers for all of that stuff, that's where I was using the 2% mark. Looking at as far as salaries, I'll leave that to Billy to focus on the salaries, and then the tax revenues is matter of just trying to balance those out.
I think that makes good sense. I think if it's possible, Jeremy, being able to understand too, I think to the point that was made earlier, I think what would be helpful is to understand kind of what are the what are the need to haves versus the nice to haves? And I mean, I know that's a very difficult question to pose. It's an incredibly competitive labor market, and I don't want to see talented staff leave either, but I want to be responsive to what we're hearing from the community around concerns for costs and places where, you know, the staff is really saying, hey, if we cut digital services, we are going to be telling patrons they can't receive things that we think that there should be an expectation of service around, by comparison to, you know, something that maybe is an exploration of an idea, and not to stifle innovation, but, you know, maybe we could deprioritize some of those costs. So I don't know if there's a way to identify that, and I don't want to make staff, you, David, you know, feel like we're penny pinching, but I also just want to be very candid about, you know, it's hard. This is such a roll up hybrid that I just want to make sure we're being as transparent as we can about what we're prioritizing, if that makes sense.
Right, and I think, you know, I think that that's absolutely fair, to look at how we are prioritizing these. And part of me goes back to, you know, you as the board, what do you think, from all of the reports you get each month and all the information that David shares, you can see what work is going on. You know, I don't think you guys would need to get into picking and choosing which programs we need to do. That's really setting the priorities, such as the racial equity and things like that. You set the priorities, and then it's David and his team that really executes all that and says, okay, here's what we're doing about it. This is how we're hitting the ground running on that. So I think there's
and I promise this is the last thing I'll say, Jeremy, to that point. I think that's what's hard to delineate in this. You know, if we were to say, and I think we've done this in previous years, my priority is pay equity and racial equity, then you guys being able to come back and say, okay, hearing that, like, this is what we propose. And I think it's tricky, you know, in this macro way to see that, right? Because each of those line items aren't delineated by those priorities, nor should they be. But I think for a frame of reference for the team members who haven't been part of this before, knowing some of those levers at a more macro level, I think will help us shape this conversation more effectively in the next few months.
Right, and I think no, that makes good sense. And I think looking at some of the technology, how do we roll out new technology that's actually useful to the people? You know, looking at the Wi-Fi access points, providing better Wi-Fi over the next 5 years. The new system that we installed last year should get us about 5 years out. And then it's going to be dated, and we're going to need to replace that. So I look to IT to do all of that. Most of the general stuff here, I think that was the term I was trying to think of earlier, was the consumer price index. On those things that are more commodities, we're going to have some, it's going to get kind of gray in there as far as utility costs and stuff like that. But that's why I use the 2% on a lot of the expenses, is just looking at, you know, average over the past decade for CPI, it was about 1.4, if my calculations are right. So just under 2. This year, CPI, I think, was 2.8. So it's higher in costs. And some of that's a matter of David and his, you know, as the executive director, managing those costs within those bounds. So I'm not sure, David, you can speak to that as far as prioritizing and looking at other ways that we might be able to reduce costs.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of leave it at that, but happy to try and sort that out if I can, but that's kind of how I put this together.
Well, I think that, thank you, Jeremy. And Sarah, yeah, I think that, you know, the issues that you're bringing up are, you know, spot on, particularly regarding the kinds of things that we need to talk about, including this evening. And by that, I mean, it's one thing for us at the board to talk about its priorities regarding things like salary and wage equity, for instance, or priorities regarding services, or priorities regarding the care of the library's physical assets. And, in those conversations, there's nothing that drives the budget and drives expenditures more than the decisions that you make regarding human resources and physical infrastructure. After those two things, there is very, very little that the library can do, that the organization can do within its expenditures to control expenditures in any way that anyone would really notice anything significant. And by that, I mean very little really that we could do regarding expenditures for library materials, which is the next largest category after the two I've already mentioned, or certainly library programs, which is relatively a very small part of our budget. So once we know what our priorities are regarding the expenditures, particularly for human resources, that tells us a lot about what kind of planning we have to do, not only for expenditures for the fiscal year that we're planning for now, but for future fiscal years. But then at the same time, really, and equally as important, what are the board's priorities and what is the board's expectation regarding revenue? Remembering that our biggest source of revenue has been and always will be local real estate taxes. Well over 95% of all of our funds to operate the organization come from local real estate taxes. And I know that as elected officials and as residents of the community, you are all thinking about and are incredibly sensitive to the issue of rising taxes and the effect that that has on residents, on homeowners, on families. So that's why I said at the beginning that we really tonight really need to understand what does this board think it wants to do regarding any increase at all in the levy for operating revenue for the library, because that's going to tell me and tell my team a lot about what we think we can accomplish in terms of the other priorities that you may have, specifically for human resources and for capital expenditures. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask Billy now to talk about the progress that the path that we've been on for the last few years regarding salary and wage equity, what those priorities have been, what we've done to try to meet those priorities, and what it would look like if we decided that we wanted to continue down that path next year and continue to try to make that kind of progress. So Billy, do you want to share a screen, or do you just want to talk through the documents as I'm presenting them here on the screen now?
David, I'm okay with you presenting, and I'll just take it one page at a time. And
you just tell me what you want to do. That's fine.
Yeah. I'll probably spend the greatest deal of time on this first page, actually, just introducing what you're looking at. You've gone from looking at spreadsheets with, first of all, thank you for allowing me to talk about one of the largest budget lines that we have, our wages and salaries. I am grateful to be working for an organization that focuses on wage and salary equity that allows me to do this work. So I wanted to first start with a moment of gratefulness, because this is the fourth year, or the fourth time I presented this type of information, this type of analysis. What you're looking at it's a very simplified version of a comprehensive review of internal and external salary information, mostly involving compensation benchmarking and compensation analysis. And I'll walk you through what you're seeing with what I mean by the ideal distribution, and what the current distribution chart is supposed to be showing you. So, but before I get too far, when I look at the compensation benchmarking and I look at like, well, who are we comparing ourselves to? We're comparing ourselves to other libraries of a similar size, similar budget, similar population served. And the main source of this external data is from the HR Sources 2021 library survey. There's over 147 Illinois libraries that participate in this annual survey, and it's a very helpful and reliable tool. So let's start talking about the charts then. So ideal distribution. What makes this ideal, or why is this ideal? So the library's compensation philosophy is to match the library market. We're not going to lead in pay, but we're not going to lag in pay. We want to be paying right at the market. And if we did this perfectly, you'd have this bell curve. You'd have half of our staff who are paid above the midpoint and half of our staff are paid below, and kind of this even distribution throughout. And of course, you'd have no one paid below the range and no one paid above the range. So, but we don't live in a perfect world. So when we go down and look at the current distribution, this is the result of doing that compensation analysis and compensation benchmarking. And as I mentioned before, this is the 4th year that I've been looking at this. And I will say right now that this is probably the best starting point we've been in. Actually, this is the best starting point we've been in. Previous versions would have had people either below range and a lot more people in the first quartile. But I want to acknowledge that that's a result of all the work that we've done over the last 4 years to increase staff wages, especially those of our hourly staff members, our library clerks and library assistants and such. So because of the actions we've taken, because of that focus on market equity adjustments, we're seeing what you have here today. And I'll just kind of explain what you're seeing in the chart. So it's what you're looking at is if you take all of our current pay rates, all of the library's employees' current pay rates as of August 2021, and if we layer in the 2022 market assumptions, what's going to show is that about 103 staff members are going to be being paid below the market midpoint for their position. So 103 staff members are paid below. But this is why we do the work. This is why we look at it every year. Again, this is current rates with a future assumption. And so when we get to 2022, we want to have it a little bit more bell-shaped, like if we can. And so that's where we're recommending increases. So, and I'll walk you through what I mean, and we'll look at the next page. So Dave, if you want to go into the next page. So there's a little more detail here. And what you're looking at is that the same current distribution chart from the previous page. But what was helpful for me when I looked at the current distribution, look at those numbers. Who are those 103 staff members that would be paid below the 50th percentile of the market? And when I broke it down by pay grade, it became a little bit more clear to me. We have, and you can see it's highlighted there, 23 people that are in grade 2 and 21 staff members in grade 1 who are making up the bulk of those staff members. That's what, 44 people. And of those 23 in grade 2, those are mostly library assistants. And in grade 1, those are mostly library clerks. And you're talking about a lot of wage compression that's happening there, where there's a lot of people that are bunched up, a lot of staff members are bunched up around the same, earning about the same amount. We've done a lot of work to move them ahead in the market, but we're still not above that 50th percentile. We're still not above the 50th percentile of the market. And to give you like hard numbers to look at here, like so those 23 staff members in grade 2, the midpoint of the market for a library assistant is about $20 an hour. The midpoint of the market is about $20 an hour. And these are staff members who have been here, many of them over 3 to 5 years, over 5 years, and are still not being paid above the 50th percentile. So that's to me that's one of the things we need to focus on. How can we get them to the 50th percentile? Also, just to note that when you're in a pay grade or within a pay range, it usually should take about 3 to 5 years to get yourself to the midpoint of I'm sorry, let me restate that. 3 to 5 years worth of increases to get you to the midpoint. And so anyway, that's the reason for focusing on it. That's the reason why I highlighted it there. And that's the reason why we're recommending a 2-tier increase structure for 2022. So we have so Dave, if you go to the next page, show what we're recommending is a 2-tier wage market equity or wage equity increases, where for those staff members in grades 1 and 2, they would receive different and larger increases than those in grades 3 through 7. So pay grades 1 and 2 are again our low hourly wage workers earning somewhere between $15 and $19 an hour, most of them. And then for grade 3 through grade 7, we'd be recommending more of a typical market equity increase where it's 5% for those in the first quartile, 3% for those in the second quartile, 2.5% for those that are in the third quartile, and 2% for above that. So, but in pay grades 1 and 2, we are recommending a 7.25% increase for those in the first and second quartiles, and then a 4% for those in the third quartile, and then 2% for in the fourth quartile, but there's none there in pay grades 1 and 2. So that's what we're recommending. And if you do that, what happens when you do that? Let's say we apply all these increases. Let's go to the next page. If you apply all of those increases, you'll see that the 23 people in grade 2 that were in the second quartile are now in the third quartile. What happens now is that those people in that group are now earning above $20 an hour. The people in pay grade, the 21 staff members in pay grade 1 went from the first quartile to the second quartile. They went from about $15 an hour to a little over $16 an hour. So that's where like a little bit of our extra focus is going, where a little extra of the increased percentages and increased dollars are going. And for all of these increases, it's going to cost about $191,000 annually. And that's about a 3.5%, approximately 3.5% increase in wages and salaries. So that is what we're recommending. And if you do that, if we're able to go with these increases, what you'll see is that future distribution above. So the future distribution chart is going to show you that you have no one in the first quartile. I'll talk about that in a second, but there's no one in the first quartile. You have 73 staff members in the second quartile, 46 in the third, 6 in the fourth. So it's not quite a bell curve distribution. But remember I said I'd talk about why there's none in the first quartile. So this is as of January 1st, 2022. As we move through the year, as we move through as we move through 2022, the market midpoint will continue to move to the right. It'll continue to move away from us. It'll continue to kind of, I guess if we were to look at this in the future and say, what's the market midpoint at that time? You would see then people in the first quartile, because the market keeps increasing. Also, what happens is that we're going to hire new staff throughout the year. The new staff members, when we're replacing staff members who have been here, the new staff members will be hired into the closer to the first quartile for wages. So that's how it will fill out. And so that's what I wanted to present to you. That's what we're recommending. And it's about 3.5% increase in wages and salaries is what we'll need to do that. And then David, if you want to go back to Jeremy's spreadsheet for the human capital section, where it says wages and salaries, it says 3.74. I think that might just include if there's any additional positions or anything, there's a little wiggle room there. Why it doesn't say 3.5, but the overall section, the overall total payroll section is only a 1.74% increase. And I think that's a very important number to look at. And like, well, how can wages and salaries, the largest line there, how can that go up 3.74%, but the total payroll is only going up 1.74? Because we received an initial, a preliminary rate for IMRF for 2022. That's about 30% less than what it was for 2021. I just want to make sure I call your attention to that very important number, that IMRF line. In there, just saying it's going down minus 27.4%. That's because of an IMRF rate decrease. So, and David, I'll turn it over to you if you want to add anything to that.
No, thank you, Billy. So that was a great explanation of not only where we've been, but where we're going based on what have been the organizations and the board's priorities for wage and salary equity for the last several years. Before we go any further, what questions might you have for Billy about his part of tonight's conversation?
Hi, Billy. Thanks. So this was really helpful. I appreciate it. I heard you say that this is starting January 2022. And I was kind of interested in that because I believe that minimum wage in Illinois is going up to $13 an hour as of January 2022. Is that, can you?
I think so. I'd have to look it up. But right now, the library's minimum wage is $15 an hour.
Right. So that bringing, I'm just trying to figure out, because I know that, I know it's not, like the percentages aren't right, but I know that currently the minimum wage in Illinois is 12. And so we're at 15. And if they go up to 13 and we go up to 16, it doesn't seem like we've really done much other than just, just shift with the minimum wage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, I think you're catching up to kind of something like I was looking a little bit at that, like how do we kind of just stay ahead of minimum wage? I mean, we're ahead of it now. How do we maintain that? Or do we want to do more? I mean, I guess the numbers I was looking at, I was trying to more maintain our separation from the minimum wage.
From minimum wage, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that if I remember, and of course I wasn't here 4 years ago, but I was trying to pay a little bit of attention. But the idea, I think, was that even 4 years ago, $15 an hour was what we thought, regardless of what the state thought. We in this community, or at least the board thought that $15 an hour was the least that we should be paying our employees. And also, I guess I was wondering if you had, I know you have the pay grades listed by number, but I was wondering if there was a reason we weren't seeing like actual salary rates there, like what the numbers actually are for each pay grade, or is that information somewhere else that I missed?
It's available on our website, and it's something I can definitely share with the board. It introduces a lot more numbers into the presentation, so it's just trying to keep it simple, and but certainly we can look at what that is for 2021, and then also what the because we do have a new recommended pay grade and pay schedule for 2022 as well. But
I think what we can probably do, perhaps, Billy, is we can just plan to introduce those additional documents into the conversation at the end of September.
Oh yeah, in 2 weeks.
Yeah, in 2 weeks, right?
This is the August meeting. This is it's totally different meeting, totally different.
Madhurima, I wanted to add that I know that $15 an hour is what we're trying to get to 4 years ago. But just for context, we got to $15 an hour in 2021.
Right.
So it just happened, for 2021. I mean, we were up against it. We were getting closer, but it didn't happen until just this year.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. That piece of context is really helpful. The reason that I'm asking for those numbers, and I can look it up on our website too, is because I think that, that there's, it's one thing to say that we want like someone who's we don't want anybody at like the first pay grade level, right? And it's something else to say, or ideally, or we want very few people, or but I think it's something else when it actually comes to like, what numbers are we talking about? What actual salaries are we talking about? And I think that it would help me understand like the percentage of increases for wages that we're asking for too. Like, so if we say 7.5% for these two percentile or these two pay grades, sorry, and then I think what I can't remember is, I'm sorry, I don't have the chart in front of me anymore, of what the higher pay grade percentage was, maybe like 4%, or I think it may have gone down to even 2% for the higher. I just think that trying to actually know trying to figure out what those what the actual income is going to be different for me, or helpful in any way.
Yeah, I understand. Most of the staff, as we're talking about pay grade 1, most of the staff are there earning $15 an hour, or $15.15 or $15.25. There's a lot of wage compression right there. And if they receive a 7.25% increase, let's just do 15 times 0.07, was it 25?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's $1.09 an hour. So if somebody making $15 an hour, we move into 1609. So again, we have, it looks like large increases. You see 7.25 on there, 7.25% increases. But you're talking about people. You're talking about staff members. Most of them earning somewhere between $15 an hour. If you go to grade 2, less than $20 an hour. So
yeah. Thank you.
Other questions for Billy?
One thing I'm guessing is that our increases also inform the average, right? So the more that we do this work, and the more that other libraries do this work to get pay equity, then that kind of moves the average up as well. So is that right?
Yeah, you're correct. We're seeing it, especially with clerk and assistant positions. Like every library is focusing on moving their wages up, and so yeah, that's why the market's continually moving away from us. And I would say, especially right now, it just seems that, especially, I don't know, I'm hearing about it a lot right now, because I think the wages are growing fastest for those in hourly positions. There's more data out there on it, but I know that I think even the Bureau of Labor Statistics is saying like hourly wage growth is, I don't want to misquote it, but it's like closer to 5%, and for salary wage growth is like between 2 and 3%. But it's just, yeah, we're seeing that growth happen, and we've been fortunate to kind of stay ahead of it, but I feel like we got to do some work to keep up with it now, and so that's what I'm experiencing.
I really appreciate seeing, how it breaks down for the different grades. That's really helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is actually the first year I've done this part. I've done the analysis, but like breaking it down by grade and sharing this information, it really helped like, well, where do we need to focus our limited resources? Where do we need to focus them at?
Any other questions for Billy? All right, some of the other questions that the board had previously also were about materials and collections. And as I said, Lee Tarullo and Barbara Fitzgerald, who I think are still with us in the meeting tonight, prepared this document for you. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. Did you want to discuss it? Did you have any questions about the information in it while Lee and Barbara are here and can answer those for you?
I don't have any questions. I found it a very helpful document. Thank you for putting that together for us.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, I also found it so helpful, and I also think that this is one of the questions. I don't know. I think this is something that maybe Jeremy was asking us to think about, was the how we're going to balance some of these decisions that we have to make. Especially if, just as we maybe come back from the pandemic, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll see a decline in digital material usage that corresponds with the increase in physical material usage, or things that, I think maybe because they point to equity issues in the first place, like use of Wi-Fi or the internet or what, like we're not going to see some of that. I was thinking, I know that it's a small part of our budget, but I was also thinking about programming in sort of the same way, is that we're doing virtual programming. Maybe we come back to more face-to-face programming, but it doesn't mean that all the virtual programming will stop, right? So that all of these, it's a doozy, I guess is the technical term that I'm trying to think about, about how we balance these when they're not actually all part of the same equation. They're maybe meeting like multiple needs, and I mean, we're also the thing that Matt pointed out earlier, that we're seeing, or we saw so many new library card library card holders, so many new members. I mean, people using the library is great, but it's not looking like it's going in just one direction, or it's not a seesaw that just because one increases, the other decreases, or anything like that.
No, it's certainly added some complicating factors to the work of people like Barbara Fitzgerald, our materials services manager, who does a fantastic job of observing trends and reviewing data and helping us to make decisions about how we're going to expend these resources. And as you point out, the increased expectations for and usage of digital materials is, I think in a lot of people's minds, that's now here to stay. But how are we going to balance that against other concerns, particularly as the cost for and expense for these kinds of materials continue to increase, and as it continues to be a very complicated endeavor to budget for and negotiate for these kinds of materials and the ways that licenses are developed. It's a complicated job, and but balance those needs and those expectations we have to do, and that's why we wanted you to have a better idea of what actually goes into trying to manage all of that. Lee or Barbara, did you want to say anything about your report or about this part of the conversation?
I think, I agree with you, David. When we put together our collections budget, we do have to keep in mind cost in terms of digital materials, print materials, and I think Barbara and her team do an excellent job of kind of keeping an eye on that and kind of moving the budget around in terms of what we need. Barbara, do you want to say anything more?
I appreciated that. All I would say is it is the expectations given by leadership and from the board really help us figure out how we're going to balance that. And it is a moving around. It's a lot with format. We have a community that loves materials, but our goal is to present our community with diverse and inclusive materials and provide the easiest access for them. And making format changes is something that is happening, but I think we can meet the majority of our community's needs with what we have and what we've been given. And I think moving forward, we're in a good place. I enjoy this, so it's kind of fun for us.
Well, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for the entire team. I'm grateful for everybody who's talked today. But thank you, Lee and Barbara, and I really, really appreciate it. I think that, at some point we, the board, have to say, right, like what our values are. Like you've done all this work and you've presented all these things to us, and so I would like to. I don't know if it's that part of the presentation yet, or that part of the meeting yet, but I want to point out that I do feel that holding steady, or like holding the line, I think was the expression used during election season, but holding the line on materials when there is an increasing need for those materials is in fact not holding the line at all. Like that it is, failure to meet what the community needs. So that's my, like, showing my hand, like that, those are my values, is that I don't think that I think that if we don't show, like if our community needs, which we do, diverse materials and needs them to be presented in easily accessible ways, just as Barbara says, then if we don't do that, then we're in fact, and we can say that on a line item in our budget that we're holding steady, but that's not what we're doing. We're actually like failing to meet that need. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Madarima.
Yeah, and it's a complicated puzzle to work with this, because increasing in digital and having programming that can be digital and all of that is an access issue for people with disabilities that, there's a lot that the pandemic forced, that has been denied for people living with disabilities. Like, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. And then all of a sudden the pandemic shows up, and I don't mean us, the library, or you, the library, I just mean in general, our culture. So it does seem really important to not restrict growth in that area. And again, if we're doing anti-racist work, we definitely don't want to kind of constrict changing and adding to materials, because we need it. Our materials have not measured up in past year, and over time. So yeah. So how do we do all of these things that meet our values and not get to the point that the village has become too expensive for the community to exist here? It's complicated. It's interesting that, yeah. So I do appreciate all of the work you all are doing, trying to manage these complicated issues.
Thank you.
It's easy to say, these are our values,
Right.
but how do we actually
Right.
pay for them?
I think Cindy, you touched on a really important point, and I think it's something we've talked about many, many years over the budgets, is the unique spot that public libraries have versus a lot of the other entities, in that we don't have a lot of fees. Even when we had late fees, we didn't, that was a very small part of our budget.
Right.
And when things take turns in the economy downward, people look to us for increased reliance. They look to us for internet access and other resources that our staff makes available through their experience and through our materials. and we end up in this position of getting pressure from both sides of that equation of both the money that we need to provide services and the expectation of services from those who may be in a position in their life where they are least likely to be least able to provide that additional funding for the services that we need to, that they are expecting us to provide them. So I think it is a constant balance that we are, people are always throwing more, we're on a seesaw with juggling everything, and people keep throwing more balls at us as we're trying to do it. So.
All right.
So, I mean, to that end, I really would, I feel like in one of these meetings, this has come out, it's happened before, where we've asked what is the sort of amount that we're talking about when we talk about the average person's tax bill that goes to the libraries, and is that the like, I think it was just like last month or 2 months ago. I guess even last month's meeting was 2 months ago, but like, what was it, the cost of what a membership would be to
Non-resident.
a non-resident? Is that what, that $400 something, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. And that figure stands as an average amount, right? So that's, based on mathematical calculations, and I don't, I use the word average. I don't know in Oak Park what exactly that means in terms of a tax bill. What is the total amount of a tax bill for an average household in Oak Park? But that, whatever that is, that amount is what, that household would be paying to the library for a year's worth of services, right? Now, if you break that down in terms of the percentages that are allotted to every one of the taxing bodies in Oak Park, the library's percentage is somewhere around 5%, maybe a little bit more. So in other words, about 5% roughly of a household's tax bill in Oak Park goes to support the library and its services. And Matt's right. When we talk about that, that doesn't speak to the budgets of those organizations, or I should say even more specifically, doesn't speak to the revenue side of the budgets of those organizations, because most of those, such as the Village of Oak Park, the Park District of Oak Park, our school districts, a great percentage of their operating revenue comes from lots of other things other than real estate taxes, namely the fees that they charge for all kinds of services that the library doesn't charge. So again, it's something always to keep in mind when you are hearing about or talking about comparing the revenue side of the library and other taxing bodies, is that, again, well over 95, 96, 97% of our operating revenue comes from local real estate taxes. Whereas for the others, overall, that percentage is much lower because of the fees that they charge for many things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've pointed out before, David, that also means that, because such a high percentage comes from the taxes, that there's really very little else that we can draw on, right, that would be part of our sustained efforts. Exactly. So grants are great and fantastic, and we love them and we would love to have them, but like, they can't be the basis. No. They can't be what in Suzanne's structure and the framework that you provided us, they can't be what, like funds are values, right? Like you can't have.
They would never, right? They would never supplant any substantial part of our operating revenue. It would never happen. And for me, more to the point is, I'm not sure that they should for a public good such as the public library. But that being said, that there are always ways that you can look for other sources of revenue. It's just that real estate taxes, property taxes are always going to be by far the largest part of our access to operating revenue. So again, for me, for tonight, if we just really distill this down to at least a basic question for tonight, so that we can get to our next conversation and then the conversation after that. If you look just at this very first page of the spreadsheet that Jeremy prepared for tonight, keeping in mind everything he said about revenue and about projected expenditures and everything that Billy said about projected expenditures based on your priorities for salary and wage equity. If we at this point, if we wanted to say we wanted to actually accomplish everything that Billy talked about tonight in the way that he talked about it, if we wanted to achieve what we want to in terms of expenditures for our collections and materials, if we want to continue to have access to funds to accomplish the capital projects that we've outlined for the next year and the year after. For next year, what we're saying is that would require an ask of 3% additional in property tax revenue. So in other words, when we prepare our resolution to send to the village to go along with our approved budget, asking for an increase to achieve everything we've said we want to achieve, that would be 3%. So I guess, again, for tonight, one of my questions is how comfortable is the board with that kind of an increase? And you can see if you just look at that very first line of the spreadsheet under revenue, line 014050, property taxes for operating, what that difference is from an estimated ending of 2021 to an estimated budget for 2022. How comfortable is the board with that request? Because if you are or if you are not, that tells me and tells my team a lot of what we need to think about and do in order to get us to our next conversation in just a couple of weeks. I currently do not know what other taxing districts or taxing bodies are asking for, but we could certainly work to see if that information is available before our next conversation. Keeping in mind, not every one of them has the same fiscal year as we do either. So.
Yeah, because I believe the township is a mid-year cycle. And I know the village won't have an idea until much later in that because part of it is they can't do theirs and finalize theirs until they get our numbers, but we can get an idea of the schools and the parks and stuff. But that's a good question, Maharim. Thank you. I personally am comfortable with what I'm seeing so far. Nothing. I was going to ask about that IMRF number, but that was explained.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you for mentioning that again, Matt, because I want to caution you. That number is great. It looks great for this year. Just keep in mind that those numbers do get recalculated every single year, and we never know what the investment returns are going to, what conditions they're going to create, and which direction those numbers are going to go. So yeah, that's fabulous for this year, and I'm happy about it. But we
can't rely on it.
We can't rely on that, right?
Okay.
So I'm sorry, I know I've been talking a lot, but I do have a question about the capital projects that we're talking about, because of course, we said that human resources and the capital projects are the two biggest line items, obviously, in our budget. And I'm just trying to figure out what is flexible there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let Jeremy chime in here again, but before he does, I would just say that, you know, there are two, I think, main issues there. Number one, there are the projects, the specific projects that we know we want to try to accomplish next year that we've outlined, that Jeremy can talk a little bit more about either tonight or in a couple of weeks. And those include things that affect the physical plant, and also that affect our technology services. So on the one hand, there are those specific projects that we're planning for, that we're outlining, that we want to see if we can accomplish. At the same time, there's the issue of making sure that we always are maintaining the kind of fund balance where we can plan for the future expenditures of things that our buildings, our facilities, our systems are going to need us to do, not maybe next year or even the year after that, but making sure that we have the kind of fund balance that's going to allow us to continue to maintain and take care of those systems. Because we can always, when it comes to those kinds of things, an organization, and of course organizations do this all the time, you can always delay, you can always postpone those kinds of things. But at some point you either have to do them because you've reached end of life and you have no other choice. And if the funds aren't there, then it's a matter of where are they going to come from? Are we going to need to borrow funds? Are we going to need to ask for bond issues? How are we going to do that? So there's these two different things: there's specific projects, and then planning, for the future maintenance of our facilities. So Jeremy, do you want to hop back on and just maybe kind of go over all of that planned a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, I think in your packet there, you'll see if you scroll down to the end of the spreadsheet there, or the end of the budget spreadsheet, go one more page, David, and you should see the capital asset study projects. Now, some of these I worked with our facilities manager to plan out for next year. We're looking at, most of the projects going into next year are small for the building. Some of this stuff is flexible, certainly, like I added in there electric vehicle charging stations for 2023, estimate $15,000 on that. So that's something that we could certainly defer. Now, next year we have brick replacement, mortar joints in the penthouse, perimeter sealant for $20,000 at the Maze branch. We're looking at the main entrance doors. This is something that we're looking at doing with the access control system project this year. So that might be something if that was already taken care of, but it's still expenditure. So it's still money being spent. The meeting room, repair and finish the meeting room. This might be done this year. Hopefully it will be done. So a lot of these are small projects from the buildings side of it. But as David said, if you defer some of this, like the sealant, then you have issues with water damage and leaking and things like that. That if you scroll down to the next page, technology and equipment, you'll see the column F 2022 outdoor Wi-Fi infrastructure upgrade for 100,000, technology equipment for staff or public 20,000. So there's not a whole lot there. And then Ethernet cables and IDF patch panels. These are something that I would think that the Ethernet cables and IDF patch panels is something that is kind of core infrastructure that if these aren't upgraded next year, they're going to soon become critical because of bandwidth and actual, just the core functions of IT infrastructure. So some of this we can postpone. You'll see in 2023, there's 108 for telecom cable infrastructure. That's something that I think we actually targeted for this year, or we deferred from this year. And so we're always looking at those. I think there shouldn't be a whole lot of fluff in the capital projects, whether it's building or IT infrastructure. So some of this stuff we can defer, but then others, we're kind of playing the waiting game, like our security access control system now, which is on Windows 97 and is not really supported we can't even upgrade it. So that's where it's critical. We're looking at how do we get the right system in place, and the time is of the essence with getting that replaced. And hopefully we'll have that done this year. So that's something where we don't want to let that go off, like in your homes or anything else, where you put repairs and maintenance off, and then you end up with a huge bill, or worse, an emergency. So the other thing I would say, keep in mind with the capital, as David mentioned too, is a lot of this, in the fund balance policy, they talk about, it mentions around 8% for capital and building. Now, if we defer a lot of this without having a separate capital fund, like a actual restricted capital fund, the danger becomes, if you reduce the expenditure on capital as you continue to increase costs on operating, then when you need capital, there's no money left for any of that. The operating has sort of eroded into the capital funding. And so that would be the one thing I would kind of just make note of, that want to just be careful of that we don't kind of rob Peter to pay Paul, and then end up with an issue.
And right, and to be clear, we do not have a restricted capital fund. We have traditionally typically expended from our fund balance to cover capital expenditures, including some significant capital expenditures, and that will continue to be a challenge that the board and the organization is going to have to address regarding the budget going forward. Did that help, Nadarima?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I didn't see any fluff when I looked at those reports, and for sure it doesn't seem that there is any. It's interesting to me because of course there's no way to have a corresponding quantifiable analysis of like human resources. Do you know what I mean? Like I wish there was a way that we could put in our line item, if we don't increase people's wages to 16%, they will wither away, like that or like if we don't do this, then that, then it'll be an emergency and we'll have to spend, I wish that's what I wish, is that there was some equivalent way that we could use to think about like the human resources also being, we're playing catch up, and the materials that have to do with like diversity, as Suzanne pointed out, like we're playing catch up in these. It's like we're running on Windows 97, which I'm sorry, that's just really funny to me. But like, I wish that there was some way that we could think about those, and it's just an impossible task. Okay. I don't know how you guys are going to make any decisions. I
What it seems like to me is, even if we're not comfortable with a 3% tax increase in a pandemic in a village that is pricing people out, there isn't fluff. You all are, really taking good care with all the different parts that are really important, and we are playing catch up in a lot of areas. So that's the trick, because I was at a gathering of people and met a number of, academics who have moved from Oak Park because they can't afford it. And primarily, academics of marginalized communities, middle class, and aging populations, and, the taxes in Oak Park pricing people out of the community and making the community turn into more of a wealthy community that starts changing some of the values by who's in the community, I mean, it's a catch-22.
Right.
So
Right.
I can't find anywhere to pull back, even though I'm not comfortable with an increase in taxes during a pandemic in this community.
Right. Well, right. I mean, I think that the reality is that if the library by itself were going to try to do something to make any measurable, what anybody would even consider to be some kind of measurable reduction in what some people like to call the tax burden, even though I hate that expression. What it would mean for the library organization is finding something right now that we're doing significantly to cut or to eliminate. I mean, that's really what it would require. Would that mean doing something significant regarding our need for human resources? Would it mean eliminating a library facility? What would that mean? Because again, there are only so many things that we could do, and because to make a significant difference would mean doing something that people would notice, that would require a significant reduction in what we're doing now, right? And unless, I mean, that's a hard conversation to have, and maybe sometime in the future, the library or the organizations will have to have that conversation. But, outside of that hard conversation, there isn't anything really else to do. So, I mean, I'm sorry, that's just a little pontification from me.
Yeah, no, it's.
But it's a truth that we need to hear. I mean, it's a reality of where the way our budget is constructed and oriented.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people like to talk about, cut here or cut there, or, distinguish between needs and wants, and, consolidate service. I mean, the conversation is all over the place, but again, if you get down to brass tacks, it really is, what are you going to cut? What are you going to eliminate? What are you going to stop doing? Because that's the only way, from my perspective, if you're going to have that conversation, to have it in an honest way. I mean, anything else is, again, the ways that people like to talk about it, it's just not based in reality. It's just not an honest conversation, because what most people are talking about would never ever achieve the kind of significant difference that I think some people would like to see. When they talk about a significant reduction, that's the key word, significant. And what would that take? What would you have to do to achieve that? And it's rarely is it the kinds of things that people spend a lot of their time talking about. Like, a couple of years ago, what was it? Again, consolidation of different services, one organization assuming responsibility for doing X service, like human resources, for instance. I'm sorry, that's never ever going to achieve what people think people say they want to achieve. So anyway, that's what it would really take.
Right.
So,
well, because, I mean, I do take very seriously any kind of ask that we would have for increasing the levy. I take that very seriously. And like you said, David, we're here. Some of us are homeowners, we're
Right.
we're not happy to be paying like a strong anyway, but I do want to point out that the library is not the reason that we have high property taxes. Like this is not, like, this is something that this is not, like, this is a statewide problem. We had a chance to maybe address it, that we seem to have passed on, in this last referendum or whatever. But like, I mean, and I'm talking about statewide, but it is, I mean, it's still bracing. It's still a bracing decision to have to make.
no, it is.
But
It
I-
is. Yeah, on the tax bill, it did appear to be more Oak Park based than state based than I thought when it's broken down. I
Which
was attributing a lot more to the state problem and not Oak Park. So when you look at the tax bill, it is, there is more that's specific to the services but it's not the library, it's the other.
Yeah, we're about 5% of the whole of the tax bill, and it's one of those things where it's we are 3% at increase of that 3% increase of that 5% does not make 8%. It makes a very it makes a very small percentage. But I also think we continue to want to keep in mind that these increases do compound over time, and those pieces. So we need to keep, it's not a, because we're small, no one will notice, thing. I think it's our, the things we do have an impact financially on the community, and everyone, especially right now, just because they got their bills, is well aware of what that means, for a variety of reasons. So while I just want to say, like, I kind of want to bring this home a little bit. I'm hearing that there are folks who are not wild about the idea of a 3% increase, but no one is saying that they're seeing a way to scale it back.
Exactly. There's where, how we've looked.
But that's and is that a fair assessment that I'm hearing as a consensus? It's like, I think
the one thing that I'd appreciate, and David, like, no one wants to, I think, make rash decisions, but I think to your point about places that, as you think, and this is really a broader, like, management operational question. We are working differently now, all of us are, and you have staff that are servicing different needs in a hybrid environment, and physical staff that are in different facilities. And as you forecast work over the next 2 years, or maybe even beyond, I think that is one question I guess I have. Do you see changes in staff dynamics or composition based on the way we used to pre-pandemic operate the library? And is there a different structure in the future that you think in any way affects kind of overall headcount strategy for you and your management team?
So in terms of the sheer number of staff that we have doing what they're doing now, you mean?
Well, and even composition of staff, right? Are there opportunities for us to, look differently at the way certain teams work? I mean, if we're really talking seriously about places that could affect the budget, I'm not recommending you wholesale change the way you do your work, but I guess I'm questioning just, are there ways that you are seeing natural changes happening based on the way you operate, or is it steady state, if not larger staff, based on kind of how you're seeing things in this environment work out?
The way I'm looking at it right now, our environment right now, I'm not thinking about more staff. I'm not thinking about a staff in terms of sheer numbers that's growing, but I'm also not necessarily thinking about it being diminished at all, at least as long as we are needing to continue to staff not only the services, but the facilities that we're currently required to staff. I think we have done, and our staff has done a very creative and innovative job over the last several years of figuring out where best to place staff to complete the tasks and the jobs that we need for the priorities that we have. And we continue to do that all the time. Every time a position becomes available in any service area, we rethink how we're doing things and why we're doing them and who we need to do them. But so I don't see that need for staff in terms of sheer numbers going up, but I also don't see it going down as long as we need to continue to service at the level that we're servicing and provide services in all of the spaces and facilities that we're currently servicing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that was just, the one place we all clearly have,
Right.
As we're hearing Billy and kind of talking through that component, I think operationally it's hard for us, from outside to know kind of the inner workings of how all of this is changing.
Yeah.
So I think it's just helpful for me to know, like, that is a steady state number, in your opinion, as we think about that set of priorities going forward. So then I think to your other point, then it's about, do we as a team, and clearly I'd be interested in the board's perspective. You said a very bold statement, which is, do we talk about not operating a building? That's a really big question.
Yep.
I don't know that I'm ready to consider that.
Well, I mean,
does the board want to explore some really aggressive strategies to maintain and protect some of the things we value at the expense of other things? And I don't know. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, I am too. I mean, I'm really glad that you said it exactly the way you just said it, Sarah, because that's really what it means. I mean, at some point, I mean, if you listen to everything that Jeremy said tonight, everything that Billy said tonight, you look at the numbers, you think about the impact that all of this has on the community. You have very clear, very strong priorities for a lot of things. And I agree with a lot of those priorities as your executive director. But as we move forward into the future, if we're going to continue to place an emphasis on those kinds of priorities and continue to make those things an important part of who we are as an organization, there might come a point sooner than later that there's going to need to be a trade-off. In other words, what are we going to need to think about not doing anymore so that we can make sure that we have the resources to do the things that we know we really need to do, or that the community really needs us to do. And I'm not necessarily prepared tonight to talk about specifics, but we can certainly plan to talk about specifics, more specifics and more different kinds of scenarios for what I'm talking about moving forward.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, my entire adult life, I have selected where I lived based on how close the nearest library is, literally. So, I certainly understand the value of branch libraries and not just having it the main.
Well, that's why, the library, the Oak Park has talked about that issue in terms of the Oak Park Library for many years, way more years than I've been the director. Even before, when the new main library was being built 18, 19 years ago, it was being talked about, and probably even before that. Ask Matt, his family's been here for what, 200-300 years now, so
and affiliated with the library for that time.
All right, so what questions do you still have that I need to hear so that we can prepare for our next conversation in a couple of weeks? In other words, is there anything that you didn't see or didn't hear tonight that you definitely want to see or hear when we resume talking about this again in a couple of weeks? Like, for instance, I know that there was question about what kind of increase other taxing bodies in Oak Park may be looking at, so we can try to get that kind of information. There was a question about earlier about new users. We can try to get more information about that. What are the other kinds of things that you would want to, Madarima, you had a question about getting a little bit more information about the specific wage and salary scales and what individual positions are earning. We can certainly provide that information. But what other kinds of things might you want to see or hear in a couple of weeks that you didn't see or hear tonight?
Well, so this would now be my third question for you to get back to. I'm sorry, but like, but I there was, when we'd had our Saturday meeting, one of the things that I'd asked about was employee contribution
Yes.
to their benefits.
Yes, yes.
And I'm not expecting that conversation will go very far. And I know you have a lot on your plate, and as do Jeremy and Billy, but I would be interested in knowing what that looks like rolled into our wage equity.
So Billy and I absolutely talked about that after our special meeting. And I think we can add an element of that to the next conversation.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I know as we talked about some of these graduated changes, I think all of us have agreed that we like the approach that Billy, you're taking, but could we see some revisions of that approach? Maybe kind of modifying the percentages in a balanced way, prioritizing, to me, the kind of lower tiers adjustment. And I know there's concern about compression, but that I know is something we've explored in past years as we have evaluated that. If that graduation feels like too big of a jump in this environment, could we look at what would a slightly reduced version look like of that wage process? Not because I want to backpedal, but because I think it's helpful for us to just see some comparable numbers.
So in other words, lower percentages in for those different levels. Is that what you mean?
Maybe just a less aggressive approach year over year.
Okay. Billy had to drop off the call to go home, but so I want to translate for him when we talk tomorrow. Yeah. So, okay. So you say a less aggressive approach.
I would, aggressive may be the wrong word, but just knowing kind of, okay, if we continue to keep that a priority, but maybe we don't go quite as quickly year over year in meeting that need. And, okay. And again, I know those numbers don't seem, as Madarima said, like 1609 does not feel like a far move. I think it's just that aggregate number, to Billy's point, if that doesn't make much of a difference overall, I think it'd just be helpful to know as we're communicating it to community members and talking about those priorities, kind of what are the approaches we evaluated.
If Billy wants a little more context, Sarah, would it be okay if he dropped you a note?
Of course.
Okay, great.
Can I? And I think I'm sorry, Sarah, but go ahead.
Just one more. I'd say the other one too, looking at the capital asset plan, are there things based on that study, right? I also don't want to be in a position where we have a system failure, but are there things in that overall strategy that may be lower risk to tier out over the years versus completing at one time? Or are there things that, like, if we're in for a penny, we're in for a pound regardless, because that's a system that kind of has to be overhauled in whole?
Okay.
Those are my only two.
Thank you.
There was something that Sarah was saying when she was talking about like the change that I would like to I guess amplify what she's asking for. When she said, not as aggressive or something, she also mentioned like prioritizing the lower wage numbers. And I think that would be an interesting model.
Prioritizing them more than we currently are prioritizing them, or?
Well, maybe so that so maybe we don't, like, what happens if the percentages increases at the higher income brackets is are less. Those percentages are a lot less.
Okay, got it.
So something like that. I don't know if that's exactly what Sarah meant, but she did say prioritizing the lower income brackets, and I'd like to jump in on that one.
Okay.
Well, and I
I
know we've looked at that. We've looked at that in past years, and I know sometimes there's concern about like tier 2 and tier 3 kind of compressing. And
Yes.
so I know there still needs to be a variation. I think it's just about, can we look at maybe some different approaches to that strategy that show us kind of the differences between them. And then we can all say, okay, in full transparency, we've agreed this is the right path forward. I just want to make sure it's hard to see without the modeling, I feel like, to make those decisions and feel really well supported.
Okay.
And I guess I would just add to that, that's kind of fitting in with my thing is there something we can just put the brakes on a little bit or put a pause on even just a year, keeping in mind that while there may be people who are not getting as much of a raise to bring us up to the levels that we need, there are people in the village who didn't have work last year. And so just trying to balance those out, and just wondering if they're like, and in general, is there anywhere, and I know we've gone over it a lot, but just, since you're asking, that there can be just a little, put a pin in it or put the brakes on or just slow it down just for this year, just because of the impact. I mean, people are really struggling in the village. And a lot of people in Oak Park tend to think of Oak Park looking like their lives. And that's not what Oak Park, it's not uniform. So I think it's really important that the library kept staff and kept that going so that people were not losing their jobs. But there are people in the village who either lost their jobs or are self-employed and had no work, and that sort of thing. So, just wanting to balance those out. And I think that looking at the lower tiers, it definitely is clear that you're prioritizing the lower tiers, and I really appreciated seeing that. But just, is there any place that, the people who can kind of weather it for another year can help balance out for the people who can't?
I hear that. Anything else?
No, we really appreciate, this is amazing, the amount of information, the explanation, all the data.
Thank you. I have a lot of great help.
It's really good to kind of be able to go through this so that we, with whatever discomfort we have, we still know that we have to make the decisions. Even if we're not comfortable, because just asking, are you comfortable? It's like, no, I'm not. In a pandemic, I am not comfortable with an increase in taxes because I know people are really struggling. But,
and the pandemic but the pandemic pulled into focus a lot of inequities that already existed. So there were a lot of people struggling in our community before the pandemic, and we just have this huge magnifying glass now that we get to see it a little bit more clearly. But of course, that was on us. That was our myopia that we didn't see it in the first place. But I wanted to add my note of thanks to everybody and to everybody who's still on this call, and I appreciate that, and to Billy who left us, but for sure, very grateful.
Thank you. All right, well, Matt, that's all I've got for tonight.
That's all?
That's all. Yeah, is that enough?
Is this, I unmuted myself again because I was like, is this where we move to adjourn? I don't.
As we have concluded the agenda items for the evening, I declare us adjourned.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
But a few.